It's time to man the defences of Bryn's world, because this week we're going to be talking about the Crimson Fist. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the best out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we'll be talking about Pedro Kantor, Chapter Master of the Crimson Fists and all-around hero, as part of a short mini-series we're doing this week on the Crimson Fists. We're going to be looking at Pedro, the Crimson Fist's Vigilist detachment, some of the obvious synergies and tricks from their codex, and an example army list. Today we're starting with Pedro himself, and as per normal we'll be talking about his datasheet, any obvious buffs, synergies and stratagems, and how I'd use him myself in a game of 40k. Now Pedro Kantor is one of the newer chapter masters in the fluff, having only served his chapter in that role for around about 100 years. His most famous actions come in the orcish devastation of Bryn's world, which took the Crimson Fists to the brink of destruction. Pedro Kantor bravely led his Crimson Fists in covert but deadly operations to drain the orcs of strength before purging them from the world, and has since been working hard to restore the Crimson Fists to their former glory. So let's see how this living legend will perform on the tabletop then. So Pedro Kantor is an HQ choice for Codex Space Marines, and it'll cost you 150 points. Just to clarify that this is the old index datasheet, there have been a couple of changes since this. He's got a movement of 6, weapon skill and ballistic skill of 2+, strength and toughness of 4, 6 wounds, 5 attacks, which has increased since the index datasheet, leadership 9, and a 2-up save. So a very solid stat line indeed, more akin to a Primaris captain with a 2-up save than your standard captain or chapter master. He's armed with Dawn's Arrow, a Power Fist and Frag and Crack grenades. Dawn's Arrow is a fancy storm bolter that's Assault 4 and AP -1, and I believe it is a bolt weapon for the Crimson Fist's extra hits on 6s. Quite nice that he can advance and still shoot it, allowing you a little bit more movement to buff things if he needs it, but it isn't likely to do loads and loads other than thin out a few hordes. His Power Fist is just the standard issue one, just D3 damage and -1 to hit, so we'll be hitting on 3s typically. But between his attacks of 5, Shock Assault, and his Oath of Bryn special rule, he will be hitting on 3s, re-rolling everything, with a mighty 7 attacks, so he's no slouch in combat at all. Talking of his special rules, he has Angels of Death for combat doctrines for extra AP on that Dawn's Arrow in the tactical doctrine, or extra AP on the Fist in the Assault. Shock Assault, as we mentioned, will put him up to 6 attacks base in the first round of combat. As per normal for Space Marine captains, he has a 4-up invul from his Iron Halo, and as he is a chapter master, he can reroll any hit rolls for Crimson Fist units within 6 inches of him. And in the new Imperial Fists Codex, this has been updated to be the new wording, so he can reroll any fails even after modifiers, which is a much better buff and also helps out his Power Fist better. Finally, his unique special rule, the Oath of Bryn, is a really unique and decently powerful rule. Any Crimson Fists models within 6 inches of Pedro add +1 to their attacks characteristics, and of course he will add that to himself as well, so that will put him up to that 7 attacks that I mentioned. That's a really powerful rule if you had him in the midst of a bunch of intercessors. On the first round of close combat they'd typically be striking with 4 attacks apiece, and could be very nasty with other more powerful assault infantry such as aggressors or other characters for example. That plus his chapter master rerolls means that he's a great buffing character and is exceptionally nasty at buffing close combat units. So overall he's a foot slogging character who's decently fighty, gives out chapter master rerolls, and will also buff the close combat of nearby units in melee. Let's take a quick look at some of the buffs and combos for him. Firstly, you have the option of making him your warlord. If you do, he gets the Stoic Defender trait, which will give any friendly units within 6 inches of your warlord Defenders of Humanity, which is basically objective secured. I'm personally not the biggest fan of this. You can usually achieve more interesting things with the use of a warlord trait, and it's quite rare that Defenders of Humanity is actually going to make the difference between controlling an objective or not. Very occasionally it might earn you a victory point, but I'd personally spring for something else myself. He has some synergy with other characters. Lieutenants can give him rerolls of 1, both in shooting and in close combat, and apothecaries can heal him. He himself can buff other characters with extra attacks, so could certainly be a valuable addition to a Crimson Fist character bubble. In terms of units that he can buff, I think that he synergizes best with anything that's moving forwards towards the enemy, has some shooting firepower, and also is decent in close combat. So mainly I'd be looking at things like aggressors, who will benefit greatly both in shooting and close combat from those rerolls and extra attacks, any intercessors, maybe assault centurions, although using those chapter master rerolls just to buff some gunline units and use them as a big counter assault threat isn't the worst decision you can make with him. I think that Pedro Kantor is one of the units that might best benefit from a drop pod, because as an assault buffing character, he really wants to be up in the enemy's face, but he has quite slow movement at base. If you deployed him via drop pod, then you could get him in range to buff things like Terminators or Vanguard veterans, and make them hit extra hard in close combat, and give them those chapter master rerolls. And of course it'd also go a long way to getting him into close combat himself, where he's certainly no slouch. He can use a lot of the normal stratagems that characters make use of, such as only in death does duty end to fight when he dies with those hopefully 7 very accurate power fist hits, honour the chapter to fight again, transhuman physiology to hopefully tank some heavy firepower. In terms of the Imperial Fist and Crimson Fist stratagems, he can use Tank Hunters for 2 command points, potentially in the fight phase to give him +1 to wound with that power fist. It's pricey, but it might push him over the edge to take out a vehicle he otherwise might not have been able to. And Slay the Tyrant could give him +1 to hit against an enemy character, meaning that those power fist attacks will be hitting on 2s rerolling 1s. Finally, if he is against Orcs, as they're the Crimson Fist's most hated foe, you can use the stratagem, a hated foe, for 1 command point, which will give you reroll wound rolls against an Orc unit with 1 Crimson Fist unit. Using this on him in the fight phase could easily mean that you could crumple a Death Dread into a small metal ball with that power fist. So if I were to field Pedro Kantor myself as part of a Crimson Fist army, as I said, I'd like to run him either one of 2 ways. Either running it as part of a advancing gun line moving towards the enemy, or put him in a drop pod loaded up with veterans and take the fight to the enemy and utilise those very nice close combat buffs. If we're thinking about starting him on the board, I would like to surround him with things like aggressors, intercessors, or other durable threats that are moving forwards. Use those very nice chapter master rerolls to keep shooting accurate on the move, and wrest control of the midfield with his melee prowess and the buffs that he can give to nearby units. When you're setting him up, as with most characters, you'll want to keep him screened from enemy shooting, potentially out of line of sight if the enemy has significant sniper fire. When in close combat, certainly don't forget about honour the chapter and only in death does duty end, and think carefully about positioning where you're going to wind up at the end of the charges, as you'll be wanting to keep any significant melee units within 6 inches of him to receive all of those attacks. If you're running him in a drop pod, I'd think about accompanying him with either Sternguard or Vanguard veterans. Use those rerolls for any shooting that the unit has before trying to make a charge into close combat and absolutely decimate any nearby enemy chaff. You could also coordinate this drop pod strike with maybe some Terminators coming down, as Terminators are one of the units that most love having extra attacks, and Power Fists benefit absolutely amazingly from full chapter master rerolls, as they'll usually only hit on a 4+. This guy absolutely loves buffing Power Fists in close combats, whatever unit they're armed on, whether it's Terminators, Aggressors, or Veteran squads. As always, when selecting a unit for 40k, you need to think about the potential alternatives that compete for the same role. The main competition Pedro has would be a standard chapter master with a 2 command point upgrade. If you're looking for a character just to sit around buffing a gun line, I'd probably think about just taking a regular captain with that 2 command point upgrade instead, as that'll cost only about 70 or 80 points depending on what gear you give him. I think to make Pedro worth it, you do have to make some use of his melee capabilities and boost his stat line, and of course that all-important +1 attacks aura. In terms of being a fighty character in close combat, I'd certainly consider things like the standard Smash Captain that's been upgraded to a Chapter Master, potentially with a Relic Power Fist or Relic Thunderhammer that's been given the Mastercrafted Relic option. This guy will most likely be fightier than Pedro, just due to having a lot more damage on the attacks, but won't be quite as good against hordes due to having less attacks on their profile. Their other advantage is that they can take a jump pack, which for a fighty buffing Chapter Master option is certainly a massive positive. Obviously the downsides is losing the armour, the wounds, the attack aura, and the 2-up armour save. So I do think that Pedro competes very well with Smash Captains, and he certainly adds something to a Crimson Fist list that you can't get anywhere else. I'd say that he's certainly a decently competitive choice, and is a solid all-round frontline commander. As always, let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below, and also if I've misunderstood any rules. Thanks as always for watching an Auspex Tactics video. Feel free to subscribe for more content just like this, or to support my Patreon if you're enjoying the channel and would like to show some support. We'll be continuing looking at the Crimson Fist throughout this week, so check back for that, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.